What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Corey Hughes Bloody History. So we're going to do something a little different today. We're going to kind of examine some CIA processes. And we're going to start with the sheep dipping of a man named Russel August Langelle. So first I'm going to read from an article that was published, I think this was like New York Times, or Time Magazine, October 26, 1959. As the State Department told it, Missouri-born, the title of the article is Foreign Relations, Prefabricated Agent, October 26, 1959. As the State Department told it, Missouri-born Russel A. Langelle, 37, security officer in charge of the Marine Guards at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, rode city bus number 107 to work as usual one chilly morning last week. Got off around 9 o'clock at the corner of Tchaikovsko and Vorovsko streets, a block from his office. Suddenly, in the very best Eric Ambler fashion, 5 civilian-clad men closed in around him. Efficiently pinned his arms, covered his mouth, hauled him to a nearby alley where waited a Zim, the Buick-copied car used by junior Red officials. Love how they called communists Reds back in the day. Driven to a nearby building on Vorovskovo Street, ex-Navy Lieutenant Commander Langelle produced his diplomatic card, claimed his diplomatic immunity from arrest. He demanded the right to call his embassy. The 5 Russian agents laughed, told him that his diplomatic immunity had been revoked. Then one Russian searched Langelle's topcoat, claimed to find a notebook, which Langelle had never seen before. Sure enough, when the Russian applied a handy chemical solution to its pages, he found invisible ink notes on Soviet secrets. The ploy? The notebook looked like prefabricated evidence for a sure-to-convict espionage trial against Langelle. The ploy didn't work. Langelle refused to talk about his embassy work. The Russian threatened him with what the official U.S. note of protest politely called physical violence, warned him that harm could come to his wife Miriam and their 3 small children. At length, the Russians promised him money if he would spy on U.S. diplomats. After an hour and 45 minutes of this, the Russians gave up, let him loose on the corner where they captured him. By afternoon, U.S. charge d'affaires Edward L. Frears delivered a hot, fact-laden protest to the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Russian reply did not deny any of the facts, instead announced that competent authorities, presumably the same Kremlin officials who ordered the kidnap, found Langelle to be engaged in secret intelligence work and therefore persona non grata. Langelle thus became the 11th U.S. official to be kicked out of Russia since 1952, but the first to undergo third-degree preliminaries. Grandly ignoring the incident, Moscow propagandists kept right on oozing words about the, quote, spirit of Camp David, which they said Nikita Khrushchev had created in the U.S. So what do we have? We have an interesting article about a guy named Russel A. Langelle, who was 37 at the time, and then he was, quote, a security officer in charge of the Marine Guards at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, okay? And they suspected him of being a spy. They kind of rough him up a little bit, and he sticks to his guns, and that's kind of what the article has informed us of. So now let's read Mr. Langelle's obituary. Russel Langelle obituary. Russel August Langelle. Langelle, Russel August, age 98. Russel A. Langelle, 98, died peacefully on Tuesday, November 24th, 2020, of natural causes. Mr. Langelle, who resided for much of his life in Northern Virginia, was born in St. Louis, Missouri. He graduated from the University of Missouri and before World War II was an advertising agency executive. During the war and again during the Korean conflict, Mr. Langelle served as a U.S. Navy aviator. Foreign postings encompassed assignments in the Far East, Europe, and the ISSR, and Africa. Mr. Langelle retired in 1978 and was awarded the Intelligence Star for Valor and the Intelligence Medal for Exceptional Achievement. In addition, Mr. Langelle was an early advocate for mental illness support and education. He was the former president of the Alliance for the Mentally Ill of Northern Virginia, as well as founder of and interim president of the Virginia Alliance for the Mentally Ill. Following his wife's passing from cancer in 2001, Mr. Langelle became an active resident at his senior living community in Virginia, where he was well known by residents and staff for his happy demeanor, mischievous grin, and fun-loving jokes. Russ enjoyed frequent visits with family and adored his great-grandchildren. He will be deeply missed by many. Survivors include Russell's 2 daughters, Dr. Linda Varner and Mary Joyce, son David Langelle, 2 grandchildren, Sarah Dickey and Joseph Langelle, and 2 great-grandchildren. Services will be at Arlington National Cemetery, date pending. So that's his obituary. That's Mr. Langelle's obituary, and from this, it sounds that he was he's a World War II guy. He was in the Navy and did a bunch of cool Navy stuff, and then he went on to live in a rest home and all this stuff. But so we've gone through an article and an obituary, and what 3 letters have we not heard yet? What 3 little letters that Mr. Langelle is clearly associated with have we yet to hear? CIA. Correct. So now I found a document on Mr. Langelle as I'm going through the JFK files. I thought it was pretty interesting because it demonstrates the idea of sheep dipping is common, very common. And after we get done with this, we're going to move on to another person who was sheep dipped towards the end of his career. All right. So Robert August Langelle. This is marked secret. This was released, I believe, in the 2017 JFK file dump. Robert Gensman and Harold Leap interviewed Russell August Langelle at CIA headquarters on May 4th, 1978. The interview yielded the following information. Langelle joined the CIA in September 1950 and worked mainly in SR-9 of the Soviet Russia Division. In November 1955, he resigned from the agency and this is in brackets, on the pretext that he was disgruntled with his assignments. His CIA files would have reflected this termination of employment. The only document to the contrary would have been a memorandum from the Director of Central Intelligence, Alan Dulles, stating that Langelle would retain all rights and benefits when he returned to the CIA. At present, this document would probably be in his personnel file. Approximately 15 people knew that Langelle was still with the CIA after his resignation in 1955. These included John Mowry, and then a couple redacted names, and then one says Chief of Operations, George Kissefelver, and some big chunk redacted. And then it says, at the time of his resignation, Langelle applied for employment with the State Department. In the interim, he worked at the Hecht Company. In March 1956, he started to work at the State Department as a security officer. In September 1956, he was sent to Redacted, where he earned a reputation for being a strict security officer at the embassy. That's Moscow, obviously. And this is in brackets. He was deliberately tough on CIA personnel who breached security in order to build his cover as a non-CIA Foreign Service officer. His salary was paid by the State Department, the CIA chief of station, and the ambassador knew he was with the CIA. Langelle served as the security officer at the Moscow embassy from December 1957 to September 1959. In addition, he was the senior CIA officer there. And you have a whole bunch of redacted stuff. Then it says Langelle handled CIA communications in Moscow. Then there is so what does he have? He has a cover of being in charge of the Marines that are stationed at the embassy, right, who are there for security, because it's technically American soil. But it then says right here that Langelle handled CIA communications in Moscow. That was his real job. In 1959, the Soviets declared Langelle persona non grata as a result of his involvement with P.S. Popov, P-O-P-O-V. Langelle was the case officer of Popov, who worked with the GRU, Soviet military intelligence. So he was there recruiting people also, right? He was recruiting intelligence agents. While making contact with Popov, Langelle was detained by the KGB and was questioned for 2.5 hours. The KGB attempted to recruit him and then released him. The State Department filed a formal protest, but Langelle was told to leave the Soviet Union within 3 days. He left the Soviet Union in early October of 1959. Langelle first became aware of Lee Harvey Oswald when he heard in a conversation that a Marine had contacted the American consular office in Moscow to renounce his citizenship. He later heard that this individual had changed his mind and was returning to the United States. He does not recall the details of these conversations, but he believes they took place in the United States. Langelle characterized Oswald's defection as a consular case to be handled by consular officers, rather than an intelligence case involving intelligence officers. Something's redacted, then it says, Langelle stated that the military intelligence people at the embassy probably would have been contacted about Oswald's defection. The military intelligence personnel included Leo Dulacki, Dulacki, in the Marines, Paul Adams in the Navy, John Munson, Munson, in the Navy, and Ted Hoffman in the Army. Then there's a bunch of things redacted. We should try to pull any information on these 4 guys, Leo Dulacki, Paul Adams, John Munson, and Ted Hoffman, as they would have been notified of Oswald's activities in Moscow. Langelle stated that when Oswald left the Soviet Union, he was the responsibility of the State Department, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and the FBI. When Langelle left Moscow in 1959, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff redacted here, it says Langelle's replacement as embassy security officer was John Abidian, Abidian, who was not with CIA. Abidian was later replaced by, and then there's a bunch of redacted stuff, so I'm assuming the next person was CIA. At headquarters, the chief of the Soviet Russia division was John Maury, Mawry, followed by Howard Osborne, which is really weird, Howard Osborne, because Howard Osborne is also the name of that other CIA fucking guy involved in the assassination stuff. Howard K. Osborne, if I'm not mistaken. And then David E. Murphy. With regard to American journalists in Moscow, Langelle had no contacts with R.G. Karengold, Karengold, or Aileen, Aline Mosby, Mosby, did not know A.J. Goldberg and was contacted by Priscilla Johnson, who fucking clearly CIA reporter bitch, for an interview after he was declared persona non grata. When Langelle returned to the United States, he continued working for the State Department. He resumed his CIA duties on a part-time basis in 1961. He dealt with communications, and then I'm sure that probably has to do with Moscow. He probably spoke Russian since he was there. Not necessarily, but it means probably some indicator. And then it says in September of 61, he resumed his CIA duties on a full-time basis at headquarters. He worked mainly in the Soviet Russia Division, External Operations, Africa, and Europe. At present, he is still with the CIA. And this was in 78. So he was with the CIA for 30 fucking years. Lifelong CIA guy, but nowhere in that obituary did it mention the CIA, did it? Not at all. And that's exactly the same thing with Vincent Caltagirone Jr., Mary Boots Roberts, and I'm sure a dozen other fucking people involved in the Kennedy assassination who people are like, oh, he's not CIA, you dumb shits. All right, and then it says he plans to retire soon. I think we have some duplication of information here. I'm going to go ahead and start reading it, and if it's definitely duplication, we'll skip it. Langelle was born October 7th, 1922. His social security number is redacted. He's married with 3 children. And he joined CIA in September 1950, worked mainly SR-9 of the Soviet division. November 55, he resigned from the agency on the pretext. Yeah, this is where it starts to double up. I don't know why they do this. A lot of these files have duplicated work. But I wanted to go over this today because I just thought it was absolutely, utterly fascinating that Langelle was, I mean, as per this memo, he was CIA, but you wouldn't know that if you had read anything else, right? There was probably no indication he was CIA until these documents dropped. So I thought it was pretty fascinating to go through this document on someone who was actually sheep-dipped, right? Because that's what sheep-dipping is. He left because he was unhappy with his assignments. He'd been with the CIA for 5 years. He goes and works for the State Department. And the State Department, see, back then, you have to assume the State Department is unwitting. They don't know that he's no longer with the CIA, who was under the State Department, right? So he left the State Department to go get a job in a different department of the State Department. This is what CIA did across the board in the State Department, in the DEA, in modern day, probably Homeland Security. The CIA just entrenches every fucking department, and they send people to go over and work in those departments for the CIA. I mean, that's just fucking reality. So when people look at like Oswald and they're like, there's no indication he was sheep dip, it's like, suck a dick. What is your problem? Like, people need to learn how to read between the lines. All right, let me see. Continue on in this document. This looks like a bunch of handwritten notes in reference to Mr. Langelle. It says report requirements to Leonard McCoy. What? Leonard McCoy? Isn't that from Star Trek? And then it says DOS, Office of Security. It says agency operation penetration on GRU. Looks like mid-intel, military intel. Looks like Peyton Popoff, agent, was case officer. He was his case officer, case compromised. Got approval from Krush, KHRUSH, to kidnap. Stepped off a bus, tried to recruit. Oh, they're talking about what happened, how he got picked up by the Soviets and then kicked out of the country. So fascinating stuff. So next we're going to move on to another person who I'm sure you're quite familiar with. And that is going to be E. Howard Hunt. All right, so I got two documents here. We're going to run through them because there is some sheep dipping that went on with E. Howard Hunt as well. At the end of his career, after all the shit that people knew about him, it's like, how the fuck are you going to sheep dip E. Howard Hunt? And this is how, like, this is like why people don't believe when you have cocksuckers like Mike Baker on Joe Rogan, who's like, I'm former CIA, but I work for the fucking History Channel promoting propaganda, right? Like, fuck you. No, you are still CIA. You were modern day sheep dipped, okay? You might be put on, I promise you there's a letter in the fucking Director of Intelligence at the CIA who says that Mike Baker still works for the CIA, right? Just like they talk about here. And just like we're going to go over with E. Howard Hunt. E. Howard Hunt, it says Everett Howard Hunt Jr., July 4th, 65 to June 1972. I don't know what those dates are. He was obviously with the CIA a lot longer than that. Maybe he was a contract agent as opposed to an employee. It says here, July 4th, 1965, letter of contract to Terrence S. Krabinic, Krabanic, employs Hunt as a contract employee. Pay $19,880 per year, 2-year contract. Memo for OGC at Norman Block from Joseph Reagan, Ragan, reference Hunt retention of royalties by a contract employee, dated August 3rd, 1965. Hunt will develop, okay, this is where it gets interesting. Hunt will develop overseas as a writer. August 12th, 1965, response from Block. Hunt should be entitled to keep royalties. They have been advised that Hunt's cover does not include role of a writer. His cover will be a light one of a retired Foreign Service officer. Okay, so here we go with the sheep dipping again. So it appears as though E. Howard Hunt was sheep dipped August 3rd, 1965. So at the end of his career, there's some shit that went on with the Greenspun letter and Hank Greenspun, and basically the Watergate happens and the burglars are busted and Hunt gets in trouble. But in that era, you'll read a lot about Hunt submitting books for approval of the CIA. So there's a lot to consider when you think about Hunt and his book writing. Was Hunt retiring? See, for a long time I kind of wondered, was Hunt retiring and then just going on this book writing spree, or was this book writing spree just more of them transitioning him to propaganda, right? Because everyone knows who he is at that point. He's busted CIA guy. He's busted with Watergate. Everybody knows who he is. So what kind of cover could you actually maintain for this guy? Well, obviously disgraced CIA agent, right? But this is back in what, let me see. This says 65 to 72. So That's after the assassination. I don't really know what he was doing from 65 to 72, and then Watergate would have happened. So he was obvious. Well, it becomes obvious he was still a CIA employee because Watergate is after all this stuff, right? So let me read this again. I think this is pretty interesting. Memo for OGC at Norman Block from Joseph Reagan re Hunt retention of royalties by a contract employee. So Hunt wanted to keep his royalties, and they were going to figure out how much royalties he could keep as he was under his cover, because most of that was going to be CIA money, right? He's working for the CIA. You don't get to keep the money. It's like if you worked at a toy store and you started selling some toys and just pocketing the money. You can't do that, right? Same thing with CIA agents. It says here, Hunt will develop overseas as a writer. August 12, 65, response from Block. Hunt should be entitled to keep royalties. They have been advised that Hunt's cover does not include the role of a writer. His cover will be a light one of a retired Foreign Service officer. All right, 8th November 65, memo for Deputy Director of Support, subject request for exemption to provision of FR 45-10B. Hunt is described as a contract employee assigned to the redacted in a sensitive assignment. That's gonna be like probably like Western Hemisphere Division or something like that, or Eastern Hemisphere, one of those two. On 17 September 65, Karamessins, Karamessins, approved a 75-25% basis for excess allowable costs. Memo for Mr. Kuhn, subject General Gaynor's recollections from Edward F. Sale, dated 1 February 1974. Gaynor became aware of Hunt's spy books and raised the issue up front on several occasions. The reaction he received, quote, "Keep your stinking nose out of this business," end quote. He was led to believe that Helms desired to improve the image of the intelligence profession and the agency, and that Hunt's books were part of the program to do so. He stated that he was never told outright that this was the case, but the responses he received led him to believe this was the case. He suggested two people who might be able to assist in Deering issue. Ray Rocca, ROCCA, and Walter Forsheimer, PFORZHEIMER, both of whom were involved in the, quote, image materials. He stated that Formheiser seemed to be aware of all the details on up-to-date basis of Hunt's departure from the agency to join the public relations firm, to the degree that General Gaynor gained the belief that Hunt was merely moving his desk outside the building but being paid by the same source as before. Miss Ethel Mendoza also followed the case. Also, Anita Pataki of CIA staff, no friend of Hunt. Memo for Stephen L. Kuhn from Lawrence J. Howe, Howe, dated 6 February 1974, i.e. David St. John books. David St. John, I guess, is being E. Howard Hunt's alias, David St. John. Interviewed Walter Forsheimer, quote, in an effort to determine if Mr. Hunt had acted in any capacity in cooperation with counterintelligence operations, recalled that after identifying Hunt as author of On Hazardous Duty, he called Karamessins, who reacted as if, quote, he had uncovered a sensitive matter of senior officer concerned. Helms called and told P that, for Christ's sake, Walter, this is the first book to come along, and say something good about the agency. Why not leave the goddamn thing alone? No indication that books were ever submitted for review. Hunt departed Washington August 5th, 1965, arrived redacted August 16th, 1965, traveled to Washington January 5th, 1965, returned to redacted January 1966. 21st of February, 1974, memo for record, subject Watergate. Frank A. O'Malley, O''Male, reports interview with Frank A. O'Malley, who retired from the agency June of 1972, was an officer in the External Employment Assistance Branch, Retirement Activities Division of the Office of Personnel, functioned to assist personnel retiring from agency in finding a post-retirement job. O'Malley was instrumental in placing Hunt in the Robert R. Mullen PR firm. O'Malley had previously served with the Central Cover staff, dealing with fundraising of covert action projects. Familiar the actions of Hunt while familiar with the actions of Hunt while Hunt functioned on the covert activities staff. Helms was listed as a character reference on Hunt's resume. O'Malley recalled a request from Hunt for an individual having skills in the area of locks and surreptitious entry. Thomas C. Amato, A-M-A-T-O, was provided to Mr. Hunt. O'Malley believed Amato did not accept employment. Let me see. Memo for Director of FBI from Charles W. Kane. That screams of an alias. Subject E. Howard Hunt. Attention, Leon F. Schwartz, dated October 29, 74. Review of record sources to ascertain Hunt's whereabouts during period of 20 November 1963 through 24 November 1963. Ooh, sounds like we're getting close to some Kennedy stuff, which I wasn't really expecting here. Interesting. Review of records to ascertain Hunt's whereabouts during period 20 November 1963 through 24 November 1963. Leave records reflect that for 4-week pay period ending 23 November 1963, Mr. Hunt took a total of 11 hours sick leave and no annual leave. In the following 4-week pay period, he took 3 hours sick leave and 27 hours annual leave. We are unable to identify the dates on which the above sick and annual leave were taken. The time and attendance records for the pay periods in question were routinely destroyed. 3 years after they were audited, travel records reflect that Mr. Hunt conducted no official travel during the month of November 1963. Memo for record. Subject, Sam Jaffe, Inquiry, Hunt and Sturgis. Well, goddamn. Sam Jaffe Inquiry, Hunt and Sturgis. 20th September 1974 from S.D. Breckenridge. Hunt's travel records show official travel in September, October, and December, but none in November. All this travel was to New York. John Richards states that we already know as a result of responses to previous requests that you have no records on Sturgis that would show similar information. He was not an agency employee. Yeah, Sturgis was not CIA. Well, not overtly CIA. Many of the people who ran with him, who inquired about him, couldn't find any CIA information on him, but of course they all lie to each other, right? However, it appears that Sturgis was Army intelligence. Like, his fundamental employer was Army intelligence. Because he was contracted to the Mossad and all kinds of other fucking people. He was contracted to the Mossad in the 1950s. 19 June 1972. IG File 12, Tab 2. Hunt served with the OSS during World War II, employed by CIA from November 1949 until his voluntary retirement on 30th April 1970. 71, Hunt served as an advisor to President Nixon in relation to his trip to China. Subject is of current interest to the Central Cover Staff. Served in U.S. Navy 1941-42. 1 year at Time Inc. Okay, Time Magazine and Life Magazine, that's CIA operation from day one. Back in the day, ran by C.D. Jackson, right? Who planted all the shit at Buchenwald. Enter Air Force, OSS, served in the Far East, 1946, May 1948, and February 1949, employed by the Economic Cooperation Administration, serving in Paris, France, as an aide to Averell Harriman. There's the E. Howard Hunt, Averell Harriman connection. December 1950. Hunt was assigned as a COS, Mexico City, Chief of Mission, Mexico City, until August of 1953. Then it says something's redacted. And it says June 1954 until February 1957. The COS, and redacted, until early 1960. Returned to U.S. in June 60 and assigned to Mexico City on Bay of Pigs. November 1961, subject was reassigned to DDP, Covert Action Staff. January 62, to the Office of the Chief of Covert Action Staff. July 62, transferred to the DOD's Research and Publication Section in D.C. July of 64. DOD's Covert Action Staff. And one thing I got to point out here is that the DOD and the CIA are in two different divisions, right? You have Department of Defense and you have the State Department. Two different things. However, it's obvious here that the CIA's got people here doing something in the DOD. See, it's one big fucking orgy of corruption. February 1965, Office of DDP Operations Group. June 65 to September 66, he was contract agent. September 66 to 30th April 1970, DDP as Chief of European Court Operations. Memo for Deputy Director for Administration from Director of Security, subject E. Howard Hunt. Date 23rd October 1974. Quote, Mr. Sturgis was not associated with the agency in any manner in November 1963. The FBI liaison officer, Mr. Leon F. Schwartz, advised that Mr. Hunt was interviewed on 17 October 1974, and Mr. Hunt advised at that time he had learned of the assassination of former President Kennedy on his car radio while he was in a leave status in the Washington, D.C. area. That's bullshit, honestly, because I actually have a real photo of E. Howard Hunt in Dealey Plaza, and it's not the three tramps. Duh. Memo, re E. Howard Hunt, 20th December 1973 from S.D. Breckenridge, fall of 1964. Hunt was alleged to have been engaged in surveillance activities of Barry Goldwater. Our files show that Hunt was in the DO division. Burns was not familiar with that title, and in August 64 was assigned to the redacted, the Washington Field Office. I suggested that Stan Gaines, Gaines, Deputy Division Chief, do Division and now DCOS, redacted, might be in a position to give a few groups on what Hunt was supposed to be doing then. Fig Coleman was on the Iberian desk when the Hunt assignment to Madrid was brought up in 1964 and when Hunt went to the field in 65. Okay, any references you hear to Madrid in the 1960s is reference to Otto Skorzeny. July 1970. Reevaluation of Hunt was conducted by the OS. That's the Office of Security. July 1971. Reported that Hunt had joined the White House staff as a consultant to Nixon re-visit to China. 11/6/70. Hunt was granted a covert security approval for use by Central Cover Staff with Robert R. Mullen and Company, a PR firm. Inquiry of the Central Cover Staff on 19th June 1972 revealed that this is the current relationship. Subject security file reflects that Verona has in the past been of operational interest to Mr. James Angleton, Chief CI, Staff DDP in connection with an operational matter. All right, next page. Michael McClaney, OS, previously reviewed by Patricia Orr and Jonathan Blackmer on 2/23/78. Then it says John Martino, OS, 1 page, 8 January 62, case 36973, Drexel Gibson. Most of the page is deleted. It says here 6, when Gibson was transferred to La Cabana, he found only one other U.S. citizen there, a retired U.S. Army officer named John Martino. Martino, believed to be from Miami, Florida, went to Cuba in early 1960 for business reasons and was picked up at the airport in Havana on arrival. He was held incommunicado for 14 months at El Principe and is now serving a 14-year sentence at La Cabana on charges of being the head of the White Rose anti-Castro organization. Martino is desperately ill with kidney and liver ailments and receives no medical care. His physical condition has kept him from being transferred to the Isle of Pines. Handwritten from John Martino's name, quote, drug addict. Norman Rothman of the Office of Security. Third agency material. FBI report dated 20th October 1960, file 97-4030. 2. FBI report dated 14 September 1960, Miami Field Office, and file Miami is 97-213. FBI report dated 6/1/60, Miami 97281, titled Albert Juan Ardura Moya, Ardura Moya. Memo for record dated as 25th April 1975, general info, late 1959, Rothman was managing a hotel in Miami Beach, Florida, which reportedly was owned by ex-Cuban President Batista through Batista's brother-in-law, Roberto Fernandez Miranda. All right. So, it doesn't really look like the rest of this has much to do with Hunt. But it's got some interesting names popping up, like Dino Cellini of the Office of Security and Edward Browder of the Office of Security. Let me read this one. Office Memorandum, 1954. Sabatino, Edward Browder, a.k.a. Edward Browder, U.S. citizen living in Mexico, born about 1917, address Hotel Monte Casino, Mexico City. Office Yep, this isn't really anything overly relevant. It's talking mostly about security officers who are stationed overseas. So we'll go ahead and we'll wrap up for today here. I appreciate everybody tuning in on this Sunday. I wasn't going to do any shows today. Like an idiot, I just released them instead of holding them for tomorrow so I can take tomorrow off, because I'm definitely not taking tomorrow off. So a lot's happening tomorrow. So we're going to do the shows as usual, but tomorrow I'm starting the new book. Tomorrow, starting chapter 1 of the new book. So that is a reality. If you have not yet tuned into Bloody History World War II, the link's in the description here. It's bloodyhistory.substack.com. It is $5 a month, but it is you're going to get 20 to 25 shows per month. All Hitler, all the time. So, all right, guys, that's going to do it for me today. I'll see you guys tomorrow.